Hi everyone, I am here with a complete rundown of how I make a junk journal. So this one is going to focus particularly on the way I do my spine where the stitch is hidden on the inside of the book. Because I really love using vintage books, and some of these spines are so spectacular that I don't like to cover them up with the strings from the pamphlet stitch, so I've come up with a way that works for me to have a hidden spine on the inside of the book. So I'm going to first start with showing you the tools that I use and supplies. First, I need some thread, an awl, and a needle, and I use a darning needle. An awl you can purchase on eBay or in craft stores. I think I've seen them in hardware stores as well. They may be a little bit thicker here, but they work. So for thread, I sometimes use crochet cotton or baker's twine or this waxed linen thread. Any of those will work fine. I also need a thick book. I use an old telephone book just for poking my holes. I use that. I like to have clips on hand and washi tape, and this is for when I'm actually putting my signatures together and I want to hold all the pieces or all the pages together. I always have my pencil and Tim Holtz center ruler on hand. Scissors, of course. And I use double-sided tape for some parts of the book, and I'll show you that later. A craft knife also comes in handy for some of the things that I do, and a little distressing tool. The glue I use most frequently for the spine part of this book is the Aleene's Original Tacky Glue, and when I'm using fabric or lace, I use Fabri-Tac. And I keep some punches on hand as well. So the book I've chosen is this Reader's Digest newer edition. It's about 5 by 7 and the spine is 1.5 inches. So generally speaking, I like to have about 1/4 inch space between my signatures so that I can have room to fatten them up a little bit with embellishments. So I've decided I'm going to go with 4 signatures in here. So that gives me 1/4 inch space in between the front and back and between each signature. The papers I like to pick out, I usually start with the digis so that I can decide what my color palette's going to be. And in this journal, I'm going to be using the Woodland Wings. I don't typically make a junk journal that is strictly digitals, so I like to pick out between 3 and 6 of the journal pages from the kit, and then I match junk with these. So in this case, I've picked out some pattern paper that I've coffee dyed. I've printed some graph patterns on the back, and then I went in and coffee dyed these pages. So it gave it a nice runny sort of tattered look. I like to use note cards and book pages and just different things. So what I do is I usually go through my junk drawer of papers and I pick out anything that has similar colors to the digital kit that I've chosen. This is junk mail. So again, it was the color palette I was looking for. And if you're wondering how you can write on something like this, I'll show you how I use these types of pages. This is a glassine bag. And sometimes I use the packaging from some craft supplies because the colors are so pretty. So this is an example. This was from some die cuts. It's the packaging. And when I use glassine bags, I cut the bottom off and I add a little half circle punch on the edge here so that you can slide cards in there. Another glassine bag. Some more junk mail. So that's what I do first, is I pick out my papers and the embellishments that I'm going to use. So I went ahead and printed some of the embellishments from the Woodland Wings. So I've got some ephemera cards here and some tags, and this one, which was a freebie on the blog. So this is all going to get used in the journal. And then I gathered up all the matching junk for embellishing, like merchandise tags and some stickers, little bags, doilies, some craft cards from somewhere, I can't remember. Oh, bed sheets. More packaging. Anything that matches the colors that I'm going for. I usually just make a pile and then I can decide what's gonna make the final cut. And this is the pattern paper that I'm going to use on the inside front and back covers. The last thing I'm going to need is a strip of Craftex. This stuff is flexible and durable, and I use this exclusively now to make these inside spines in my books. So I've cut this piece at 3 inches wide by 7 inches long, and then I scored it so that I have a 1.5 inch spine on the inside of this. And so these two little flaps are about 3/4 of an inch on either side here. This is what the signatures are going to get sewn to. Now, when I say 1.5 inches, I usually take away about 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch before I fold, just so that this sits nicely tucked into the original spine of my book. First thing I want to do is gut my book so that I can use the cover. Now, modern books are bound a little different than vintage ones, and that means that the spine is glued and just a little bit tighter in the book. So you have to be a little bit more careful compared to a vintage book, which was usually just stitched and has become much more loose. So it's just a little easier to cut through a book block like this than it is in a newer book, but I'll show you how I do it. So when I'm looking at my book from the top, I try to stick my finger in there and just loosen up some of this space here. And I do it on both ends. And I usually hear the paper coming away from the spine piece. So that gives me a little bit of space in there for cutting, because I wouldn't want to accidentally be putting my knife through there and have it cut through the spine, which I would work with it anyways. I would then, cover the outside of the spine instead. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep this intact. So I do this on the front and back. I go in and I just loosen that up a little. You can hear it cracking a bit. So that's the glue coming away from the cover. So, okay, so I've loosened it a bit. The next thing I need is my craft knife and a metal ruler if you have one, but that's what I like to use. Now, to cut the first side, I go in this way. I stand my book up and I take my blade, and I don't want to cut this way. I want to put my blade this way so that it's in the same direction as the spine. Okay, this way. And while I'm cutting, I pull this away as I am going down the book so that I can see where I'm cutting. And then I can turn it sideways like this and see if I'm on the right track. There you go. So now it's a little easier to do the other side because I can just take the entire block and turn it this way. And with my ruler, I can just go in and cut this way. I just take a pair of scissors or my craft knife and I just clean this up a little bit. Next, I've trimmed my polka dot paper to go on the front and back inside covers, and I measured these so that they are completely covering the original paper, and I'm sticking these down with double-sided tape. I use score tape, and what I did was I used the 3/4 inch on 3 sides and then the 1/2 inch on the side that's going to be going down here. And the reason for that is because I want extra strength there, because this little piece here of the craft text is going to be glued here. So I want this paper to actually be strong enough to hold the weight of this. So I did this on this one and this one as well. So I'm just going to stick these down. I'm going to distress the cover because it's not vintage enough for me, and I'm just going to do that with a regular sanding block from the hardware store, and then add a little bit of distress ink in the walnut stain. I'm going to let this dry a little while, and then I'll decide if I'm adding a metal corner. And if I do, I usually put a little bead of glue, metal glue, in the creases here, just a tiny bit, before crimping it down on the book. Now, it's a good time to do that while the cover is still flat, but it's not impossible to add corners once your book is assembled if you change your mind. Because I've added ink to it, I'll give it a clear coat of Mod Podge spray just to seal it in. It's now time to prep my signatures before sewing them into the spine. So this is where I determine if the pages that I've chosen are in the right order. and if I want to add any sewing machine stitching details before sewing them into the spine. It's a lot easier to run a page through a sewing machine than it is trying to run an entire book. I've decided to use 4 signatures, and each of them has about 6 pages, so that leaves me some space to bulk it up with embellishments. Also, the larger pages are measured to be about a 1/4 inch smaller on the top and bottom and on the one side than my cover. That's just the guideline that I use. This is where I position all the smaller pages so that they don't move once I am sewing my signatures into the spine. And this is where my washi tape comes in. Now I'm going to press my pages down. I'm going to make sure they're all evenly together on the top and bottom. And pressing down on the center here, I'll grab a clip and hold each signature together before marking my holes. I'm going to mark my holes, and instead of using a small template piece of paper, I'm just going to mark each one individually with my ruler and pencil. I'm now going to mark my holes on this hidden spine, and it's the same idea as when you're marking your book cover when you're sewing signatures into the book cover itself. To see a tutorial on this, you can go to my pamphlet stitch page, and a full tutorial is available there. Now this is my favorite part of making a junk journal. It's when my signatures are sewn together. So here they are. They've been sewn into the hidden spine, and I'm ready to glue this to the inside of the actual book spine. I've also added my 1/2 inch double-sided tape on the inside of these little 3/4 inch flaps, and this will be glued down after my spine part is dry. So I'm going to be using Aleene's tacky glue again, and just adding a little bit of glue along the spine here. And then I'm carefully lining up this inside spine so that it's centered top and bottom and on either side. And I'm making sure that my book is opening and closing without effort on both the front and back. I'm applying a little bit of pressure, giving it a minute to set. Then I'm checking it top and bottom. And while it dries, I'm going to add a rubber band. to hold the spines together. And I'm just letting it dry for a while. Now I can glue down these two flaps on the front and back, but before doing that I decided I wanted to ink the polka dot paper, so I used the old paper distress ink. I like to go in and I like to sort of fold and bend the Craftex paper. Because it's so flexible, I like to give it the bend that it needs for the book cover. Before I leave, I wanted to show you how I use these junk mail pages, because a lot of people wonder how you can even make use of something that's covered in images. And that's pretty simple for me. What I do is I take strips of extra paper that's either lined or even this coffee stained stuff, and I just cut it to size, and oftentimes I just staple it on. So what I do is I take my glue stick and I usually just give it a little bit of a dab on the back here, and I glue it down so that it's held down before stapling. And I can either do washi tape, but like I said, I like the staples. So that's one way. Another way people do is they add a little bit of gesso or paint on their pages, and that way they can write on that surface. I haven't chosen my closure yet, so I'll be showing you what I ended up deciding on in the next video. And then last but not least here, I wanted to show you that what I do with the tails on my signatures at the center here is I usually use hearts, and I call them my hearts on a string. But because this is the Woodland Wings collection, I went with the butterfly punch. So I'm going to be gluing these just with my Scotch scrapbooker's glue. So I'll just be putting a tiny little drop on the back wings and center, and then just sticking these back to back on the very end of my strings. So to do that, I usually make sure that my strings are about an inch away from the top and bottom in length from the center, so that gives me room for my little butterflies not to be sticking out too much on the bottom. Now the full flip through of this completed junk journal is in the next video. I hope you found this one helpful, especially if you're a newbie to junk journals. And feel free to have a look at all of the other tips and tutorials on the website, and make sure to ask questions if you have them. Bye!